The moment Prince William allegedly put pen to paper and signed a private order cutting his own brother off completely, the fairy tale officially died and the gloves came off. Because this was no longer sibling rivalry whispered behind palace walls, this was a cold, calculated royal severance, triggered by the humiliation that unfolded under the blinding lights of Dubai International Airport, where Prince Harry, once a son of the crown, sat trapped for 4 relentless hours in a glass-walled VIP detention suite while his title meant nothing, his calls went unanswered, and the world watched his influence evaporate in real time. That Dubai disaster was not just an airport inconvenience, it was the detonator, the final insult that pushed William from silent containment into decisive execution. Because while Harry was reportedly pacing that sterile lounge demanding recognition, William was already being briefed through diplomatic back channels, already absorbing intelligence reports, already weighing the reputational damage that had been done not just to the monarchy, but to Britain's fragile alliances in the Gulf. And insiders now whisper that by the time Harry's private jet wheels left the runway, William had made up his mind that this cycle of reckless ventures, shadowy deals, and public implosions would not be allowed to continue under the royal banner another day. You have to understand the scale of the embarrassment to understand the fury. According to accounts surrounding the February 22 interception at the Dubai VIP terminal, Harry did not arrive like a disgraced prince. He arrived expecting doors to swing open, motorcades to roll, officials to bow, and instead he was met by biometric scanners flashing red and stone-faced, authorities informing him that his entry clearance had been revoked. 4 hours. 4 full hours of waiting, calling, pleading, escalating. 4 hours in which the Duke of Sussex reportedly attempted to reach contacts in Riyadh, only to be met with silence. And while he was allegedly insisting that he was there to secure a future for his family, palace sources claim that in London, alarm bells were ringing at a volume not heard since the original departure from royal duties. Because this time, it wasn't a podcast, it wasn't a memoir, it wasn't a Netflix documentary airing grievances. This time, it was oil money, sovereign territory, and diplomatic risk. The so-called Amber Crude initiative, the grand desert gamble that insiders say consumed Harry throughout late 2025, had already strained nerves at Buckingham Palace long before the Dubai rejection made headlines. Leaked messages and shell company movements painted a picture of a man attempting to pivot from victim narrative to energy power broker, convinced he could bypass traditional channels and carve out a private oil processing venture in one of the most tightly controlled sectors on earth. And here is where William's alleged private order begins to make chilling sense. Because from the palace perspective, this was not entrepreneurial ambition, this was reputational arson. The monarchy survives on neutrality, on state-to-state respect, on centuries of carefully maintained diplomatic relationships. If a former working royal appeared to be leveraging his title in pursuit of a private oil stake, that was not just embarrassing, it was dangerous. Sources close to Kensington Palace now claim that within 48 hours of the Dubai hold, a confidential memorandum circulated between senior aides outlining protective distancing measures. The language was clinical, but the implications were brutal. Immediate cessation of informal liaison privileges, revocation of residual courtesy communications, and a formal advisory to foreign offices clarifying that private ventures undertaken by the Duke of Sussex were neither sanctioned nor endorsed by the Crown. The public saw a brief statement emphasizing focus on state relations, but insiders insist that behind that restrained wording lay the true shocker, an alleged directive signed off by William himself establishing what one aide described as a hard perimeter around the institution. And if that sounds dramatic, consider the timing. Reports indicate that while Harry was still inside the Dubai terminal attempting to salvage entry, William was concluding high-level engagements in Riyadh, reinforcing alliances Harry had allegedly attempted to access privately. To future King William, this was not a coincidence, it was a direct collision course. One brother operating within structured diplomacy, the other appearing to freelance in the same geopolitical arena. According to whispers that refused to die, William convened what has been described as a containment circle at Sandringham days later, reviewing not only the airport fiasco, but the broader financial unraveling tied to the Amber Crude project, including claims that significant personal assets had been liquidated in pursuit of founder status. Whether those numbers are exact or exaggerated, the optics were catastrophic. A prince gambling inheritance on a refinery dream while international authorities labeled him a reputational risk. The alleged private order, as described by sources who swear it exists, did 3 explosive things. First, it clarified that no future diplomatic introductions, letters of support, or soft endorsements would be extended on Harry's behalf under any circumstance. Second, it instructed royal legal teams to explore defensive positioning should any foreign entity attempt to imply crown backing in commercial negotiations. And third, most controversially, it established a children's safeguard protocol, ensuring that any financial or welfare support related to Archie and Lilibet would bypass their parents' business dealings entirely and be administered through independent structures. That final element is what turned an already combustible situation into wildfire, because to Harry it signaled not just financial separation, but a vote of no confidence in his stewardship. Remember the reports emerging from Montecito suggesting that as the oil venture intensified, domestic tension followed: staff departures, frantic calls, escalating loans, and alleged diversion of funds originally earmarked for long-term security. Whether every detail is airtight or not, the narrative coalesced into something far more damaging than a failed investment. It became a question of judgment. And William, by temperament and training, has always been cast as the cautious heir, the stabilizer, the one who absorbs chaos rather than generates it. To him, insiders claim the Dubai humiliation was the visible tip of a much larger iceberg of risk, one that could not be managed through polite distance anymore. The emotional undercurrent here is impossible to ignore. This is not merely a boardroom decision between executives. This is a brother deciding that the cost of loyalty exceeds the cost of separation. Those who have observed William over the years describe a man who rarely moves dramatically, but when he does so with permanence. The alleged signing of that private order was described by one palace figure as the moment the rope was cut. No public shouting, no explosive press conference, just a document circulated quietly, reshaping the internal architecture of how the institution interacts with Harry from this point forward. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the silence surrounding Harry's return from Dubai reportedly felt heavier than any headline. The Amber Crude entities were wobbling, lenders were tightening, and Hollywood allies were stepping back. In that context, the knowledge or even suspicion that William had formally sealed the door would have landed like a final verdict. No more emergency calls answered. No more back-channel smoothing. No more ambiguous gray zone where he could operate as both outsider and insider simultaneously. Cut off completely does not just mean financial, it means symbolic exile from the machinery of the monarchy. And yet the most ruthless twist of all may be the strategic brilliance of it. By moving decisively after a visible diplomatic embarrassment, William positioned the action not as personal vengeance, but as institutional necessity. The narrative shifts from brother versus brother to stability versus volatility, from emotion to governance, from family feud to constitutional safeguard. Whether that private order is ever publicly confirmed or remains a whispered legend inside palace corridors, its impact is already echoing in every subsequent development. Because once the perimeter is drawn, once the institution chooses survival over sentiment, the path back narrows to almost nothing. The Dubai disaster may have been the spark, but William's alleged signature turned it into a permanent fracture. And the real question now is not whether Harry can recover financially or socially, but whether a prince who once stood second in line can ever find relevance when the future king has quietly, decisively, and allegedly removed him from the equation. If part 1 was about the signature, part 2 is about the shockwave, because the moment William allegedly authorized that private order, the ripple effects began detonating across 3 continents at once, and what makes this chapter even more volatile is that Harry didn't just lose access, he lost leverage. And for a man who had spent the last 5 years weaponizing proximity to power, that is a far more devastating blow than any airport humiliation ever could be. The Dubai disaster may have been the visible collapse, the biometric scanner flashing red, the 4-hour containment that reduced a prince to a waiting passenger. But the real implosion happened quietly afterward, in the silence of unanswered calls and the sudden disappearance of diplomatic courtesies that once arrived automatically. Because here is what insiders are now alleging with increasing boldness: the so-called hard perimeter wasn't symbolic, it was operational. Foreign offices that once tolerated ambiguity were reportedly handed formal clarification that no commercial overtures linked to Harry carried institutional blessing. Invitations that might have been tentatively extended in elite circles were paused. Back-channel introductions dried up. And in a world where influence is currency, Harry's account was suddenly frozen. For years, he operated in a gray zone. zone, technically outside the core structure but still benefiting from residual aura. After Dubai, that gray zone allegedly vanished. The timing could not have been worse for him. Financial tremors tied to the Amber Crude gamble were already rattling Montecito. Reports of liquidated assets, leveraged property, and aggressive bridge financing had begun surfacing. Lenders, once dazzled by title and visibility, were recalculating risk. And when Williams' alleged directive signaled that there would be no palace safety net, no quiet smoothing of reputational edges, the equation shifted brutally. A high-profile client without institutional backing becomes exponentially more volatile. The glamour fades, the numbers remain. But here's where it gets even more combustible. Palace observers claim that Williams' move was not only about protecting the monarchy from geopolitical fallout, it was also about protecting the heirs. The so-called Children's Safeguard Protocol whispered about in elite circles reframed the narrative entirely. It implied that the institution was prepared to step in for the welfare of Archie and Lilibet if circumstances required it, but crucially, without reinforcing their parents' ventures. That distinction matters. It suggests the monarchy was drawing a moral line, the children remain royal blood, the business gambles do not. And imagine how that must have landed inside the Sussex household. According to earlier reports, tension had already been escalating as financial strain intensified. Staff departures, late-night calls, mounting pressure. Add to that the knowledge that William had allegedly formalized separation, and the emotional temperature spikes beyond manageable. This is no longer sibling rivalry, this is structural isolation. Meanwhile, in London, the optics were surgical. No dramatic speeches, no inflammatory statements, just that clipped emphasis on state relations and integrity. Publicly calm, privately decisive. That contrast is precisely why the move feels so devastating. William did not explode, he executed. And in royal strategy, execution always outlasts emotion. There is also the psychological dimension, the one no one says out loud but everyone understands. For years, Harry positioned himself as the disruptor, the truth teller, the one willing to challenge a centuries-old system. But disruption only works when the system reacts visibly. When the system instead absorbs the hit, recalibrates, and removes you from its architecture entirely, you are left shouting at a wall. The alleged private order did exactly that. It transformed Harry from internal critic to external noise. And then there is the geopolitical layer. The Dubai rejection was reportedly tied to reputational risk assessments. In regions where loyalty and hierarchy are paramount, public familial fracture reads as instability. William's decisive distancing may have been designed to reassure allies that the monarchy remains unified and disciplined at its core. In that sense, the order wasn't punishment, it was damage control. Cold, efficient damage control. Back in California, the silence around Harry's return from Dubai spoke volumes. No triumphant re-entry, no defiant public address. Just the growing murmur of financial unwinding and brand deterioration. Hollywood, notoriously allergic to volatility, began recalibrating. Partnerships once built on royal mystique suddenly required risk analysis. When your biggest asset is access and that access is gone, the recalculation is ruthless. And here's the part that turns this into a long game rather than a momentary scandal. Once William ascends fully to the throne, any temporary perimeter becomes permanent doctrine. If the alleged order was signed in his capacity as Prince of Wales, imagine its reinforcement as king. The future is being shaped now. Structures are being built now. Lines are being drawn now. By the time ceremonial transitions occur, the operational framework will already be in place. The tragedy in all of this is that it didn't have to unfold this way. The Dubai disaster was not inevitable. It was the culmination of escalating risk. The Amber Crude venture was not destiny, it was choice, and the alleged private order was not impulsive. It was reactive containment. Each step followed the previous one like falling dominoes. But once the final domino tipped, the reset was irreversible. What we are witnessing is the transformation of a family feud into constitutional reality. Harry may still hold his title and name, but influence has dimensions beyond nomenclature. Influence is access, trust, backing, endorsement. Strip those away, and what remains is visibility without authority, noise without power, memory without momentum. And perhaps the most haunting image remains that Dubai lounge, the 4-hour pause that symbolized everything a prince waiting, phones unanswered, doors closed. That scene now mirrors the broader picture. Calls not returned, invitations not extended, channels not reopened. The airport was just the physical rehearsal for a much larger denial. William's alleged signature did not create the fracture, it formalized it. It did not ignite the crisis, it concluded it. And in royal history, conclusions matter more than confrontations, because once the institution moves on, it rarely slowly looks back. The world may continue speculating, debating, dramatizing, but beneath the noise, one reality feels increasingly solid. After Dubai, after Amber Crude, after the alleged private order, the monarchy recalibrated without hesitation. And Harry, once central to its future narrative, now exists on the periphery of a story moving forward without him. The perimeter is drawn, the order is signed, the cut is clean.